The year was 1887. And in the Arkansas Ozarks, winter did not arrive gently. It descended upon Newton County like a shroud, a heavy, suffocating blanket of ice and snow. The wind, a relentless predator, howled through the skeletal branches of hickory and oak trees, its mournful cry echoing across the hollows and razorback ridges. For the families huddled in their isolated log cabins, the world shrank to the flickering circle of firelight within their stone hearths. This was a land of stark beauty and even starker realities, where survival was a daily negotiation with the elements. The isolation was profound, almost absolute. A journey to the nearest neighbor could be a treacherous day-long ordeal, and the county seat of Jasper felt as distant as a foreign country, a place you only went if you absolutely had to. This was a landscape that shaped the people who lived within it. It bred a certain kind of person, resilient, self-sufficient, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. The steep, unforgiving terrain was etched into their faces, and the silence of the deep woods was woven into their very character. In this environment, secrets were as common as the stones in the creek beds, and grudges could be nursed for generations, frozen in time like the ice that clung to the waterfalls. It was a place where community was everything, a fragile web of kinship and obligation. But it was also a place where that web, if disturbed, could unravel with terrifying speed, leaving everyone exposed and vulnerable to the cold, hard truths of the mountains. The days grew shorter, the nights longer and colder. The sun, when it appeared at all, was a pale, watery disk that offered little warmth and even less comfort. Families relied on the food they had put up during the bountiful autumn months, jars of beans, smoked hams, and sacks of cornmeal. The rhythm of life slowed to a crawl, dictated by the rising and setting of that week's sun and the constant demanding need to keep the fire fed. It was a time of waiting for the thaw, waiting for spring. But in the winter of 1887, something else was waiting in the bitter cold, a chilling drama that was about to unfold, one that would haunt these hills for more than a century to come. In this frozen, isolated world, a man's reputation was his most valuable possession. It was a currency more stable than any paper dollar, built over years of hardship, honesty, and hard work. Or, in some cases, it was built on something else entirely, something harder, something more feared. It was into this brittle, watchful silence that a single act of thievery would drop like a stone into a frozen pond. The act itself was small, almost trivial in the grand scheme of things. But the ripples it created would grow into a tidal wave of paranoia and terror, forever changing the lives of those who called this remote corner of the Ozarks home. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the story was just beginning. Not far from the meandering Buffalo River, nestled deep within a secluded hollow, lived a family that was a story unto itself. They were the Hatfields. But these were not the famous feuding Hatfields of West Virginia and Kentucky, a detail often lost to time. This was a different branch of that same thorny family tree, and they had brought the family's formidable reputation with them to Arkansas. The patriarch was Moriah Hatfield, a man known throughout the region as Old Man Hatfield. He was a towering figure, not just in stature, but in presence. With a long, flowing beard that was more white than gray and eyes that seemed to see right through you, he commanded a unique mixture of respect and fear from his neighbors. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. The Hatfield homestead was more of a fortress than a farm. It was strategically placed, difficult to approach without being seen, a testament to a family that valued its privacy and perhaps its security. Moriah and his wife Polly had raised a formidable clan of sons and daughters right there in that isolated hollow. His sons, Elias, Johnson, and the rest, were chips off the old block. They were hard, capable men, skilled with rifles and axes, and fiercely loyal to their father and to each other. They were known to be tough, unyielding, and not the sort of men you'd want to cross. The family kept to themselves for the most part. Their interactions with the wider community often brief and strictly business, which usually involved their primary, though unspoken, trade. You see, the Hatfields were moonshiners, and they didn't just dabble. They were masters of the craft, producing some of the finest illegal liquor in the Ozarks. Their whiskey was a well-known, if whispered about, commodity. It was a business that required secrecy and a certain level of intimidation to protect. Everyone knew not to meddle in Hatfield affairs. It was an unwritten rule of the mountains, a piece of local wisdom passed down from father to son. To disturb the Hatfields was to invite a kind of trouble that didn't just go away. It was a lesson the community had learned through observation, a healthy respect for a family that seemed to operate by its own set of unshakable laws. Their reputation preceded them everywhere they went. It was a complex tapestry woven from rumor, fact, and a healthy dose of mountain legend. Some saw them as honorable, if intimidating, men who simply wanted to be left alone. Others saw them as a dangerous element, a law unto themselves, capable of anything. The truth, as it often does, likely lay somewhere in the murky middle. But one thing was certain. The Hatfield name carried weight. It was a name that promised consequences. And in the biting cold of that 1887 winter, someone was about to test the limits of that promise, a decision they would come to regret with every fiber of their being. One frigid morning, as the pale winter sun struggled to climb over the ridge, Morai Hatfield discovered that his world had been violated. It wasn't a stolen horse or missing livestock, crimes that were serious enough in these parts. It was something far more personal, a direct affront to his livelihood and his authority. His moonshine still, the heart of his operation, a complex contraption of copper pots and coils, was gone. The thieves had been bold, slipping onto his property under the cover of a moonless night and making off with the heavy, cumbersome equipment. For any other man, this discovery would have meant a furious, immediate, and perhaps violent response. A ride to the sheriff in Jasper, or more likely a posse of armed men scouring the hillsides. But Morai Hatfield was not any other man. He did not fly into a rage. He did not round up his sons and their rifles, at least not yet. Instead, a strange and unnerving calm settled over him. Those who saw him in the days that followed described a man possessed by a cold, calculating stillness. He surveyed the tracks in the snow, the broken branches, the subtle signs left behind by the culprits. His keen eyes missed nothing. He was a man thinking, plotting, turning the problem over and over in his mind. He knew that a public accusation would be pointless. The thieves would deny it, and without the still as evidence, the law would be powerless. No, this required a different approach, a Hatfield approach. Morai decided against involving the authorities. The law of the land was one thing, but the law of the hills, his law, was another. He believed the official legal system was slow, inefficient, and ill-suited to delivering the kind of justice he felt was warranted. This was a personal matter, a slight against his family's honor and their very way of life. It demanded a personal resolution. He gathered his sons, not for a raid, but for a council of war. They would not be seeking the sheriff's justice. They would be dispensing their own. It would not be swift, and it would not be loud. It would be a slow, creeping, and terrifying campaign of the mind. His reaction, or lack thereof, sent a quiet tremor of unease through the nearby settlements. People expected an explosion of Hatfield fury. When it didn't come, a different kind of fear began to take root. The silence from the Hatfield Hollow was more menacing than any angry shouting could ever be. It was the quiet of a predator stalking its prey, the unnerving calm before a devastating storm. Neighbors exchanged worried glances over their fences. They wondered what old man Hatfield was planning. They knew he was not a man to let such an insult go unanswered. The theft of the still was the first move in a deadly game, and everyone in Newton County was about to learn that Morai Hatfield was a Grand Master. Morai Hatfield began his investigation not with a gun, but with a quiet and methodical mind. He was a student of human nature, a keen observer of the subtle currents of gossip and behavior that flowed through the isolated community. He and his sons began to move through the area not as accusers, but as listeners. They would show up at the local crossroads store or at a neighbor's cabin to borrow a cup of sugar, engaging in seemingly idle chit-chat. They listened to who was spending a little too freely, who was avoiding eye contact, who was telling stories that didn't quite add up. They paid attention to the whispers, the boasts made after a few drinks, and the sudden anxieties of men who had once been carefree. Piece by piece, like assembling a complex puzzle in the dim firelight, Morai constructed his case. He drew on his deep knowledge of the local families, their histories, their alliances, and their weaknesses. He knew who was desperate for money, who held a secret grudge against his family, and who was easily led by others. It was a meticulous process of social forensics. He cross-referenced scraps of conversations, observed the patterns of boot prints in the mud, and noted who seemed unusually nervous when the Hatfield name was mentioned. Slowly but surely, a list began to form in his mind, a list of men he believed were connected to the theft. The list had 12 names on it. Once the list of 12 suspects was finalized, the true Hatfield campaign began. But it wasn't a campaign of violence. Not yet. It was a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to fray the nerves and shatter the confidence of the guilty. The Hatfields began to collect information, not just about the crime, but about the men themselves. They learned their habits, their fears, their daily routines. They knew when they left for town, who their friends were, and what secrets they kept hidden from their own families. This information was their ammunition, and they were preparing to use it with surgical precision to dismantle the suspect's peace of mind, one man at a time. The investigation itself became a tool of intimidation. The sight of one of the Hatfield boys simply watching from a distant ridge was enough to send a chill down a man's spine. A sudden, silent appearance at the edge of a field as a suspect was plowing would leave him sweating and looking over his shoulder for the rest of the day. The Hatfields were everywhere, and nowhere at once. They never made a direct threat. They never raised their voices. They simply watched and listened, their silent, judging presence becoming a constant, oppressive weight on the minds of the 12 men who had found their way onto Morai Hatfield's list. The game had truly begun. With their list of 12 suspects complete, the Hatfields unleashed the next phase of their chilling plan. They began to send messages. These weren't straightforward accusations. They were cryptic, unnerving notes, left in places where they were sure to be found. A piece of paper tucked into a fence post, a message scrawled in the dirt of a path, or a single meaningful word carved into the bark of a tree near a suspect's home. The notes might contain a fragment of a conversation the man had recently had, or a reference to a private matter no one outside his family should know. The message was clear. We know what you did, and we know everything about you. For the 12 men, this campaign was a descent into a living nightmare. Their own homes no longer felt safe. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves in the night sounded like approaching footsteps. The psychological pressure was immense and unrelenting. One of the men on the list was Cornelius Neely Ashworth. Neely was known as a talkative, somewhat boastful man, and he found himself at the center of this terrifying storm. One morning, he found a crudely drawn picture of a moonshine still pinned to his cabin door. A few days later, a dead blackbird, a symbol of a tattletale, was left on his porch. The message was tailored just for him. The Hatfields knew he was the weak link. Neely Ashworth's mental state began to crumble under the strain. He became paranoid, agitated, and consumed by fear. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He jumped at every unexpected sound and started accusing his own friends and family of spying on him for the Hatfields. His wife and children watched in horror as the man they knew disappeared, replaced by a terrified, haunted stranger. He would ramble incoherently about whispers on the wind and eyes watching him from the trees. He was a man being systematically dismantled from the inside out, a living testament to the effectiveness of Morai Hatfield's cruel and calculated revenge. The other suspects fared little better. They grew gaunt and hollow-eyed. They stopped visiting their neighbors and fortified their cabins as if preparing for a siege. The web of trust that held the community together was being shredded, one terrified man at a time. Old friendships soured as suspicion grew. Was their neighbor a spy for the Hatfields? Had their own brother let something slip? The Hatfields had weaponized the community's own interconnectedness against it, turning friends into potential informants and neighbors into objects of fear. The silence from the Hatfield Hollow continued, but its effects were now screaming through the minds of the 12 marked men. As the weeks of psychological torment wore on, the community of Newton County descended into a state of collective paranoia. The fear was no longer confined to the 12 suspects. It had become a contagious affliction. People who had nothing to do with the stolen still began to look over their shoulders. The silent, watchful presence of the Hatfields had created an atmosphere where no one felt safe. The mental decline of men like Neely Ashworth served as a terrifying public spectacle. His descent into madness was a stark and brutal warning to anyone who might ever consider crossing Old Man Hatfield. It was a lesson taught not with a bullet, but with a whisper. The pressure eventually became too much to bear. It is said that some of the men, broken by the relentless fear, secretly returned the parts of the still they had taken. Others simply vanished, leaving their farms and families behind, choosing to flee into the unknown rather than endure another day of the Hatfields' silent judgment. A few, like Neely Ashworth, were broken completely, their minds shattered beyond repair, left as empty shells of the men they once were. The campaign had been a resounding success. Morai Hatfield had exacted his revenge without ever firing a shot or being charged with a crime. He had reclaimed his authority and reinforced his family's fearsome reputation. In the end, the full story of what happened to all 12 men was never known for certain. The truth became lost in a fog of rumor, legend, and the deliberate silence of those who were too afraid to speak. The tale of the stolen still became a cautionary one, whispered around hearths for generations. It served as a stark reminder of the old laws of the mountains and the consequences of breaking them. The events of that winter left a permanent scar on the community, a legacy of fear that lingered long after the snows of 1887 had melted away. It reinforced the isolation and suspicion that were already part of the local character. To this day, the story of Morai Hatfield's psychological warfare remains one of the Ozarks' most chilling and enigmatic tales. It's a story about a different kind of justice, a justice that was patient, creative, and utterly terrifying. No official record of the crime or its aftermath exists. All that remains is the legend, a ghost story rooted in a cold, hard truth. It speaks to a time and a place where a man's will could be a more powerful weapon than any gun, and where the deepest fears could be brought to life by nothing more than a whisper on the cold winter wind. A chilling thought, indeed.